who wants America to get weaker? Outside of, forget about the enemies. What I'm talking about is the name that comes up often is, what are your thoughts about World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organizations, and these organizations that kind of stand alone, and they're here for the world, and you'll hear the name coming up with Klaus Schwab, and where he's at and what he's trying to do, and the New World Order. Where do you stand with that when you hear that?
Well, the left and the globalists want America to get weaker. That's been a divide, I think, that wasn't really appreciated until Trump came along, okay? With his America First policy, which is anathema to establishment Washington. That's because these people aren't nationalists, they're globalists. They want to use American power, they want to use America as an engine to realize a globalist world order, that's dominated by supranational institutions like the United Nations and the World Courts and the World Economic Forums, and the elites who run these things will be making the decisions for us. Whenever they try to encourage us, and most of the wars that we've been fighting in recent decades have this globalist agenda. The war in Ukraine, the reason we're there is because we want people to think, we want the nations to think that warfare is obsolete, that in the 21st century you can't fight wars, and you shouldn't be acting on national interests the way Russia is, okay? That you need to subordinate your concept of national interests to this larger agenda. The globalists believe, and the left, that nationalism is evil, that it is responsible for the wars of the past, and the way of getting to a peaceful, ordered world is by subordinating nationalism and maybe evolving past it altogether to the concept of the world citizen. That's why our borders are wide open, okay? Because that implies a nationalism. That implies, old-fashioned nation states. They want open borders. They want supranational institutions running everything. And a lot of the wars that don't make sense to most Americans, because most Americans are nationalists and are America first. Are. And they say, why are we in Afghanistan? Why are we in Iraq? There are rationalizations that are concocted to appeal to them and say, well, we're in Afghanistan because of the war on terrorism, because we don't want the bad guys to come and attack the United States again from Afghanistan. And that was the rationalization there. And the rationalization for going into Ukraine, our involvement in Ukraine is, well, we don't want Russia and China to attack our allies and U.S. interests in World War III. And that makes sense to a lot of Americans. It makes enough sense so that we've been willing to support wars like that, okay? But is that the real reason the elites are going into these wars? No, that's not the real reason. The real reason is these globalist explanations. The idea that that any nation that violates another nation's sovereignty has to be punished, and therefore America is going to be the world policeman on behalf of these supranational institutions, enforcing this new globalist world order. And that's why the Biden administration and the European Union and the NATO alliance, that's why they're in Ukraine. It's because of these. So we have elites who use nationalist rationalizations to convince the people, to try to convince the people, yeah, we need to keep staying in Afghanistan forever and forever. But you can also see a lot of the agenda there. For example, in Afghanistan, I mean, how was it serving our interests to want to turn Afghanistan, not only to quell the Taliban, okay, but we were trying to turn them into a feminist secular democracy, okay, and have the values of the globalists imposed on a country like Afghanistan, which is clearly an impossible thing to do. And Afghanistan is, it never went through the Enlightenment. It never went through the Renaissance. It didn't have an industrial, none of the historical things happened to make it, that happened in Western Europe to make possible a democratic, secular, feminist democracy, and yet, nation building, the notion of nation building itself is really globalist nation building, building the nation with value systems that are embraced by the globalists. So you've got this is the dilemma, and I think Americans are waking up to it, that their leaders, despite what they say to them about their agenda, in these countries where they appeal to our patriotism to get involved in a war, that really they have ulterior motives that have to do with globalist interests that are not the same and oftentimes are opposed to what U.S. vital national interests are. And I think Ukraine is a great example of that. The vital national interest of the United States right now is to not get in a nuclear war with Russia that could destroy the United States. That's more important than anything. But our policy is acting like that doesn't matter at all, and that we can just keep doing and pushing and why, and it's because American national interests are not first and foremost in Ukraine. It's the globalist agenda. Russia's got to be punished for trying to protect its national interest, what it perceives as its national interests and its empire building in Ukraine, and they've got to be brought to heel. And
what is the solution, though? To just stay out of the way and let them? Is a solution let them do whatever they want to do with Ukraine and we do nothing? Is that the solution?
Well, in the end, we may not be able to have any control. But my solution, what I think we should do. Biden, I think, should mobilize U.S. nuclear forces and put them at least on DEFCON 3, right? Even though Putin put his nuclear forces on alert back on February 27th, okay? Historically, whenever the Russians have done that, we mobilize our forces so that they're in a more survivable posture. We have no choice. We're supposed to do that because we don't want them to be able to do nuclear Pearl Harbor on us. But the Biden administration has broken precedent and has left our forces at DEFCON 5, which is the lowest readiness level. And they're saying, well, we don't see any evidence that the Russians have really mobilized their forces, which is a lie because there's actually all kinds of evidence that Putin has mobilized those forces. And those forces actually don't even have to be all that mobilized because the Russian strategic forces are designed to make a surprise attack 24/7, all the time. They're on a condition called constant combat readiness. And so when conditions exist where Russia may have a reason to launch a surprise nuclear attack, we need to mobilize our forces to a survivable posture. So one of the first things I would do is I would mobilize those forces, go at least to DEFCON 3, so that it would make it harder for them to do a nuclear Pearl Harbor. We're offering their necks to them right now. And then I would immediately inform Putin and say, we're mobilizing our forces. You've left us no choice. We've got to do it because you mobilized your forces. And we've exercised great patience. We've been waiting for you to come down with your forces, but you haven't. So we're not planning to attack you, but you've left us no choice, okay? And neither of us wants to have a nuclear world war. So let's try to eliminate the problem and negotiate a peace in Ukraine right now, and I'm willing to negotiate with you on the basis of the peace treaty that you had offered to the United States and NATO Europe before you invaded Ukraine. Let's go back and we'll negotiate. I'm not going to say that we're going to give you all your points, but there are many points in that peace treaty that are just as much in our interests as they are in NATO's interests. In Russia's interests. For example, not bringing Ukraine into NATO. Yes, we're gonna give you that. We're not going to expand NATO further eastward. So all these Partnership for Peace countries, that Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Southeast Asia, all these countries that are on the way to becoming NATO members, because they're in a Partnership for Peace. We're going to give you that. Those are examples of things that I would readily agree to in the treaty. So there's a lot that could be given up. And I would try to use the negotiations beyond achieving peace in Ukraine. I would try to use the negotiations to hit the reset button with the relations with Russia, because our real objective should be to split the Russian-Chinese alliance We face the most formidable block of military and economic power that we've ever faced in our history, this new axis that comprises not just Russia and China united, but North Korea and Iran too. They're all part of this anti-Western bloc. And I don't think we can win a new Cold War or a World War III against that block of power. They have, not only do they have the economic and military advantages, but they have the advantage of political will. These are the totalitarian and authoritarian states. They've been willing to sacrifice millions of their own people building socialism. They would be willing to sacrifice far many more people than we would to win a World War III against us. We don't want to get into that situation. So we need to split that Russian-Chinese alliance as a way of pulling the whole world back from the edge of a war and turn it into a new Cold War, a competition that's economic and diplomatic and political, not a military confrontation. And so I would use the negotiations over Ukraine to try to hit the reset button with Russia and make them at least neutral, okay, in the new Cold War with China, or even a strategic partner. Because I think Putin was willing to do that during the Trump administration. I think Putin knows that in the long run, China is a bigger threat to Russia than the West, and that he's better off.
Putin knows that.
I think he knows that. I think it's obvious. When you look at World War IV.
What's obvious exactly?
What's obvious is that Russia has a shared border with China, has a diminishing population and a diminishing economy. China is greedy for the natural resources, including in Siberia and territory. I think Putin knows that the Russians are chess players, that after World War III, suppose there is a World War III and they defeat us, okay? There's going to be a World War IV, and that's going to be between the new axis. Russia and China will confront each other in that World War IV. And I don't think Putin wants that. I think he'd rather be a strategic partner with the West and avoid both a World War III and a World War IV if possible, if he could hit that reset button and have us as a partner to protect Russia against China. And I think Putin, all through the Trump administration, was waiting for Trump to hit the reset button. That was their plan. That was what General Flynn was advising before he got fired over that nonsense. And but Trump was not ever in a position politically where he could make it happen. The Democrat Party, made it impossible for President Trump to do this, to take this step that was vital to our national security, to try to hit the reset button with Russia. They're accusing him of being Putin's puppet, and it wasn't politically possible for him to do it. But we could do it if we were negotiating over Ukraine. We'd try to protect Ukrainian interests, as much as we could. It helps that the Ukraine apparently has been prevailing in a lot of these areas. I don't think that we're going to be able to get the Donbass back, any areas that the Russians actually control. Ukraine might have to resign itself to becoming a rump state. And in the long run, it may not be possible to save Ukraine at all, because Russia is going to consider it a vital geostrategic interest of its. But at least temporarily, at least temporarily, because Ukraine has had good fortune in the war, we would have been able to buy some time for Ukraine. But my concern is not Ukraine. America has no vital interest in Ukraine except avoiding a nuclear war with Russia and gaining, and if we can turn lemons into lemonade and gain a strategic partnership with Russia, our vital interest is avoiding a nuclear war with Russia and getting them to be a neutral or a strategic partner in the new Cold War with China so that we can prevail in the new Cold War with China or a World War III if that becomes necessary. And that's what I would do. And I think people would be surprised that despite all of the rhetoric and all the rest, all the angst over the Ukraine war, I think we might be pleasantly surprised at how quickly, Russia is willing to, and they might even be willing to make temporary, very significant concessions over Ukraine in order to have that strategic partnership with the West so that they're not in a doomed partnership with China. A partnership with China is ultimately going to doom Russia, even if they win World War III, because they won't probably win World War IV against China. And by the way, that's why China is rapidly building up its nuclear forces. Right now, China needs Russia because Russia is the dominant nuclear power in the world by far. But China is building up nuclear capabilities so that by or before 2030, they will be a nuclear challenge to Russia. Those nuclear weapons, I think, are aimed at us. But I think China is thinking about World War IV too.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.